You've got the microphone, Brenda.
This is not a microphone.
Oh, you could.
It's not a microphone, sorry. We're live streaming, and by holding this, it's just being taped. So it's not actually a microphone, so I have to speak up. I'd like to welcome you here to the Marvin Gelber Print and Drawing Study Center. I'm the manager of the study center, and I bet there's a lot of dog lovers in the audience. Either that or lovers of Erika Ritter.
Thank you.
Okay. We are really, really pleased that Erika agreed to do this for us. You may not know this. I'm sure you don't. I bet you know, some of you will know a lot about Erika, but you may not know that Erika has been spending a lot of Wednesday afternoons in this space, and she has been copying, drawing, works in the collection, some of the works that you see out here. I think she's probably drawn all of these and many more. Any works that we could find that have images of dogs. And this is partly pleasure, I'm sure, and educational, but also she's using this as preparation for her next book, which I'm sure she'll refer to in her talk tonight. So it's been great having Erika with us on Wednesday afternoons.
I'll still be coming.
Oh, she's going to keep coming.
Yeah.
Great. That's great. Well, the novels and the books that Erika has written to date on the relationship between humans and canines, as many of you are probably aware, there are a couple of major ones. One is her comic novel, which many of us I'm sure have read and enjoyed. It's funny and it's irreverent, and we could say a lot more about it. It's told at least partly from the point of view of Murphy the dog. So I recommend that. And then her more serious study called The Dog by the Cradle, the Serpent Beneath, Some Paradoxes of Human-Animal Relationships, which is a more recent study that she's done. And I'm sure some of that research will be reflected in her talk tonight too. But just to give you a very brief biography, Erika is a novelist, playwright, essayist, and creative nonfiction writer. She has published many works, including Autopilot, a Chalmers Award-winning play, as well as 3 collections of essays called Urban Scrawl, Ritter in Residence, and The Great Big Book of Guys, Alphabetical Encounters with Men. It sounds great, too. And as I mentioned, she's explored the human-canine relationships in 2 of her more recent books. And the last one that I mentioned was shortlisted for the Writers' Trust Nonfiction Prize in 2009. For more than 3 decades, beginning in the 1890s, Erika hosted and guest. What did I say? The 1890s. What did I say? The 1890s?
Just about.
Whoops.
You're close. You're
Okay.
close.
Sorry. Dyslexic. 1980s. She hosted and guest hosted numerous current affairs, arts, drama, and music programs on CBC Radio, and I'm sure many of us have listened to her there. Yes. So, Erika was born in Regina, Saskatchewan. She now lives in Toronto, where her interests include drawing, animal advocacy, cycling, and, most importantly, collecting slinkies. So, welcome, Erika.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody having come out. Many of you are people I know and who have been so there for me in so many other occasions, and also people that I know are interested in the subject of dogs and art, and people that are interested in art. And first of all, I do want to thank Brenda Ricks, who introduced me, and who also was one of the people who first had the idea that it would be interesting if I did a Close Encounters talk based on the time I've been spending here and the work that I've been doing. And it was Edith Lane, who is one of the volunteers. The volunteers here are wonderful people. This is a wonderful place, and if for no other reason than to get people who haven't been here before to come here and find out that on Wednesday afternoons you can have direct and personal access to fabulous original prints and drawings by great masters of all kinds. That's reason enough for you to come here. And my journey, in this place to assemble finally the works that I want to talk about tonight, or talk about some of the elements of these works, really began for me when I found out about this place. And the way I found out about it was taking a class that I think it's called something different now, but Kelly Aitken was teaching a course called The Hand of the Master. And it was a class that takes place in this room, configured differently on Thursdays, I think it was, when I took it. And it was the first realization I had that there were times when the public had direct access to this material under, supervision of trained volunteers. Not too many art galleries, I'm sure those of you who frequent art galleries do this, and I don't know which. Okay, so, you can't, the MoMA, the Met, wonderful as they are, and many other fabulous galleries in New York, London, and elsewhere, you can't go to the Print and Drawing Center and have request works or have works on display that you can simply come and look at. So for someone like me, this is an ideal situation, and it's also for the Print and Drawing Gallery an opportunity to have people like me who aren't principally, God knows, in my case, artists or scholars, to explain how being able to come here has really facilitated their work. As Brenda said, my own interest in coming here on a regular basis after I had taken Kelly's course was to find out what there was of dogs by various artists, because I'm working on a number of novels, and one of them involves a kind of fantastical artist of dogs who is the master of the dog in kind of both senses of the word, who's dedicated his artistic practice to dogs and only dogs. And it spans a lot of centuries. It's a kind of fantastical novel, so that the way artists have related to dogs at different periods of history was really important to me. As well, the print, I draw in the art gallery, as do many people. I've taken classes here too, where the copying takes place in the galleries with the paintings and the other works. But there's something incredibly special about being able to look at works of art in either drawings and prints, where you really do see the hand of the master. You really do see the most preliminary relationship that the artist had with that subject matter and that piece of work. So it's been a wonderful experience for me in every way. And the drawing of it, I mean, at one point Brenda thought that I should show some of my drawings, and I thought not. There is one I do want to show, simply because the original, the serograph of Alex Colville's Dog with Bone, which I want to mention, is in the Colville show, which is now in Ottawa. But I have my own crappy drawing of it, which I will show you in due course, just because, as a kind of point of reference. But there is something, again, I'm sure there are a lot of people in this room who probably draw a whole lot better than I do. And there is something about drawing the world, whether you're good or not, that makes you really look at things. And as they say, the more you look, the more you see. And certainly, when the choices have been made by master artists, the choices in composition, the choices in texturing, highlighting, and so on, it's really instructive to draw it however lamely you draw. And this is, as you can see, a pleasurable room in which to be. I've met wonderful people here doing other research. One of them is Albert Evrard, who is working on his own project, which I hope one day would become a Close Encounters, because he brings up fabulous works, and he's dealing with the depictions of aging in art, which is really, really interesting as well. And so the conversations that go on in here are wonderful. This has been a great adjunct to my life. It's quite unexpected. And I would also, before we start, and I must get started, I would like to thank everybody who's made this possible. Brenda and Edith Lane and Jane Smith and and Pat and Brenda and other Jane and Susan and all. I mean, there are many volunteers, some of whom are here and some aren't, some of whom's last names I know and some I don't. But and Natalie Hume and Magdalene Azamakis, and people who have really taken my project on and made it plausible too, simply by their interest in it and the search for things. I mean, this is, I think, one of the things certainly that my novels are about, and many novels are about, and life itself is about, is the quest. It's looking for things. It's why when you go on holiday, you try to find souvenirs or pick up shells. It's a kind of a purpose. It's what the French would call un but. You know, it's an end and a purpose in activity. And for me, it's been wonderful that people here have lent themselves to my project, to the projects of other people here. I know Albert would say the same thing. I mean, it's terrifically supportive. So for all those reasons, I'm very glad to be here. And I want to talk a bit about these particular works. It was an embarrassment of riches, finally. There were a whole bunch of works that were suggested to me. Some I drew, some I was initially resistant to, including some of them here, but then they turned out to be keepers. And so to get it down even to, I mean, there's more works here probably than there should be. Often with these talks, there's only about 7 or 8. And I won't and can't be really detailed about all of them. But I would like to give you an idea of why I made these choices and what I've learned about the relationship of artists and dogs from looking at and drawing these works. The first work is by Edwin Landseer, who's probably the most famous of all dog artists. He was British, he was Victorian. This work was done, this is what, again, you can look at it more closely afterward. One of the great things about these talks, I think, is that you're looking at the original works, not at slides with laser pointers and stuff. There is the disadvantage where it's very hard to see. Some of these are very small. So, but this is one of two. The more famous one you've probably seen is called The Chief Mourner. And it is this dog with his head on the coffin of the shepherd who has died. And I've drawn it too. And this is a print version that was done by Frederick Hollier. It's a mezzotint, which means it's a kind of print that has contrasts of light and dark. I don't know the technical way these things are done, but it's sort of roughed up so that the print winds up resembling more a painting and less the kind of hard linear lines of an engraving. And this was done in the kind of late 1830s, so just when Victoria ascended the throne. Landseer was around for quite a bit of Victoria's reign. He died in 1870. And during the course of his long career as an artist of animals, not just dogs, he drew and painted the children of Queen Victoria with the pets. He did lions. He did the lions in Trafalgar Square, if you know those big statues of lions. They were cast by, or not cast, but certainly designed by Landseer. And this companion piece to The Chief Mourner is called The Shepherd's Grave. This is a dog who is standing over the newly dug grave. In fact, it's so new that on the tombstone it just says, "Here lies," and you can't read much after that. It's as if it's all just been in preparation. This was turned into a print because, as many of Landseer's works were, it was enormously popular. These were middle-class works. And they're Victorian, and it's very sentimental. And it is the dog as we like to think of the dog, the incredible and endless devotion of the dog. The master is dead, but the dog is still there. He has eyes for nothing and nobody except the grave. I chose this one rather than its companion piece because in this one we see his face, we see the sorrow on his face, we see the riveted gaze, and he is standing there kind of alone like a wolf on a hill. And it really essentially, I think, is the kind of art, it's called sentimental art for a reason. It flatters us. It flatters us because of the centrality of us to this dog. The shepherd isn't even here. He's what the philosopher Carol J. Adams would call the absent referent. He is the important thing in the picture that's not there. It's all about him. It's all about his not being there. And yet the dog will continue. I mean, another popular Victorian trope, as you probably know, was Greyfriars Bobby, who was, there's various versions of the story, but he was a real Skye Terrier whose master came into Edinburgh and died and was buried in Greyfriars Kirk in Edinburgh. And one of my friends here and I and another companion hunted fruitlessly around Edinburgh because we had a faulty map that sent us out to the suburbs, when in actual fact Greyfriars Bobby's little statue is right downtown, right next to the Greyfriars Bobby pub. But in any case, the dog came into the churchyard, would not be sent away, and wound up living there for 16 years. And although there's rumors there was more than one Greyfriars Bobby, and that they were in it for the snacks, but that's another story. But in any case, as the devoted dog who would not leave the master's grave, he was finally memorialized in a statue and a novel and several movies and so on. So that is one depiction, and there's a wonderful New Yorker cartoon that to me kind of sums up this whole idea of the way we see ourselves, the way Landseer allows us to see ourselves in this picture and others, which is, you've probably seen this one, I don't even know how old it is, but St. Peter is at the pearly gates, and a man of advanced middle age is arriving at the pearly gates to be signed in. He's newly dead. Besides St. Peter, there's a dog bouncing up and down. And St. Peter says to the guy, "Oh, you must be little Bobby. Rex here has been talking about nothing but you for 50 years. And that is, I think, how we like to think of them. And people like Landseer help us to think of it in this way. Now, completely, I don't know which side to stand on, but you probably can't see these very clearly anyway. This is Franz Snyder's chalk drawing, The Wolf. And thank you, Brenda. And my talented assistant, Brenda, will be passing among you. It was drawn in the early 1600s. Snyder's was a Dutch, or a Flemish artist, rather, who worked with Rubens, with Peter Paul Rubens. Rubens was, as you know probably, had a big atelier, many, many talented followers and helpers who did things. He was commissioned, was Rubens, to do the inside of the banqueting hall at Whitehall Palace in London, and the ceiling was one of the big features of it. This wolf, who is depicted here in this wonderful but troubling drawing, was in fact, he's a minor detail. I found him on the internet. I found the banqueting hall ceiling, which is the pictures, the apotheosis of King James, who's rising up to heaven, being lifted by an eagle, and mere animals are kind of down below him, one of whom is this wolf. But when you see him, I initially actually discovered this one before I was even involved in coming every week and having people find things for me. I just found him in the catalog, The Wolf. And as you can see, to me, the reason I chose him is that this is the other side. This is the opposite of the devotional side. This is, Brenda mentioned, I wrote a book called The Dog by the Cradle, the Serpent Beneath. And in that is a central myth, which is as old as humanity, which is the notion of the faithful dog who is left to guard his master's child. And in the absence of the master and any other human agency, a huge serpent comes into the nursery and makes its way across the stone floor toward the child. The dog, who is a greyhound in most versions of the story, leaps up, fights with this enormous snake in the melee, because it is a big snake. Furniture is overturned, including the cradle with the master's child in it. And there's blood and there's mayhem. And when the master comes in, and finally the dog does defeat the serpent, throws the body into a corner behind a curtain, and when the master does come in, he sees nothing but the circumstantial evidence, which is that the room is a mess. The dog is there, blood dripping from his jaws. The dog comes up to greet him, thinking, as they say in the story, to be praised for a deed well done. The master can't find the child, thinks that the dog, jealous of the child, has attacked and killed the baby in his absence, pulls out his sword, kills his faithful dog. Only later is the cradle overturned, the baby discovered perfectly well, and the body of the serpent behind an arras, with tooth marks that could only have been made by the dog, and so on. The ghastly truth is revealed. But the story, to me, more than anything, it has many manifestations, and I go through them all in my book, because I think it's a story that's It's so central about our relationship with animals in so many ways. But the notion of trust that turns to mistrust. In an instant, the fear of the savagery beneath. And this wolf, I think, really epitomizes that. Franz Snyder's did draw and paint dogs, too. He was a well-known artist of dogs. His dogs are mostly dogs on the hunt. Dogs who are snarling in the kitchen, fighting over sausages with other dogs, or with cats, often, struggle with cats, or eyeing dead swans, lying on the table about to be cut up and eaten. His dogs are never, at least the ones I've seen, never particularly cuddly. They're very well rendered, but the kind of instinctual ferocity is very close to the surface. His wolf, which has, you'll see when you see it closely, it has these short, thick, muscular legs and big paws. It's got more the body of some kind of compact lion than what we think of as a wolf in Canada as a timber wolf, a leggy, bony, kind of long-faced beast. But it's caught. There's some kind of restraint around the middle, and something, it's as if it's been snared, or maybe it's being held for this pose so that it can be drawn by this artist who's going to then give it to Rubens, or is going to do the details. All of the work for the Whitechapel ceiling was done in Antwerp and then shipped over to England and installed. Rubens never even saw it.
One wonders if he'd ever seen a wolf.
Well, that's a good question. In the 1600s, this is the early 1600s, in Belgium. I don't know. There were wolves all over Europe pretty much. That's how grim fairy tales and things, get their fuel, is from stories of rapacious wolves. But this, it's more the kind of the idea of a wolf, and he winds up just being this kind of minor figure in this larger canvas. So the idea of this truly alien being, it's like King Kong on top of, the Empire State Building or something. He's fighting off his would-be captors, and he's not understood, and he doesn't understand them. Beside it is a work that was in the previous Close Encounters, which is from a series of lithographs by Eugène Delacroix from the early 1820s, which were created by Delacroix for a reissue of Goethe's Faust in a French edition. And this was in the Claude, Mireg, Claude Mireg, who did the previous talk, and I had never seen this before. And it is print number 5 of the series, and it depicts Faust and Mephistopheles, and this dog behind is called the water dog. What happens is, it's fairly early on in the Faust legend. Mephistopheles is just kind of taken up with Faust. He's going to lure him down the path of, I'll give you all knowledge if you trade your immortal soul. And so he's bringing out a few tricks to start with. And they're walking along, and you see Faust, he kind of pulls his skirt up, his scholar's skirt, because this dog, this lolloping dog, and it's beautifully depicted. The breed is called a Barbet, which is kind of an ancestor of the poodle and also a Portuguese water dog. Those dogs, those wonderful, smart, loose-limbed, floppy dogs. And he's endearing the way he comes on. He's got one paw extended, he's got one ear up, like, how do you like me so far? That kind of, how dogs are, he's wagging. And even Mephistopheles says, he growls at you, but he doesn't, the legend under it, he growls at you, but he's not attacking you. See how he crawls on his belly and wags his tail. And the dog is asking to be taken home. Back in the background, there is a village, presumably whence the dog has come, with a little thing of smoke coming up. So maybe where the dog has just been. The dog has created vast devastation. Hard to know. But in fact, he looks innocent, except his eyes are glowing, kind of terrible eyes. And what happens after this is that Faust lets the dog come home with him and Mephistopheles into the study, and as soon as the dog gets inside, he expands like the dog in Ghostbusters. He grows to this huge, ravening thing with big, huge rolling eyes. And this is the beginning of Faust's career in necromancy and various kinds of dark knowledge that in the end undo him. So here again, it's a very ambivalent presentation of a dog. It's sinister, and yet it comes in this kind of beguiling and guileless guise of a dog. So I love the water dog. It's a wonderful drawing to draw because of the lines of it, and because Delacroix, who, as we know, captured humans and horses and motion so wonderfully generally, it's a terrific representation. So as we move along, I mean, those two to me represent real ambivalence, and an ambivalence with a predilection to the darkness. There is also, I think, a kind of view that we have of dogs that's represented very well, first of all, by Alex Colville. Again, this is a study, and I'll get my really bad drawing of the dog with the bone. This is the actual painting, and I think we all know this Colville painting. It's from the early 1960s, and it's called Woman and Terrier. And the drawing is very exactly like it. The posture of the woman, the way she hugs that dog like a lover, the way her hand cradles the back foot of the dog. The painting version is what's called a porthole painting. And there are numerous Madonna and child paintings that are done this way. One, particularly Raphael's Madonna of the Chair, is a porthole painting with Mary. She's not holding the child Jesus' foot, but she's kind of got him around the middle, and it's been compared to this painting. But what's interesting about this work, and again, you'll have more chance to look at it if you don't know it, is that the woman's face is obscured. It's the dog we see. He is principal, and yet he's not looking at her. He's looking off somewhere. She's clearly in some kind of emotional state. Behind them, they're at an airport runway. There's a mesh fence, Gordon Lightfoot territory here, big 707 set to go, right behind them. So some kind of human drama is taking place, and she is either seeking comfort from the dog, or the dog's master is the person who's, it's very hard to know, but the dog himself is quite absent emotionally. He's elusive. He's looking off. He's not there. And in Colville's work, the gaze of the dog, as with a lot of artists, where they're looking, who they're not looking at, it suggests a lot of things. It suggests, Colville always said that he thought animals were entirely innocent, incapable of malice. But his dogs, I think, and he did many dogs, and many of them were in that Colville show that is now in Ottawa. But often to me, there is something darker, whether Colville intended it or not. And this dog, there's a quality of self-absorption in the dog, and also a sense maybe that the woman is aware of the transitoriness of canine life, the brevity of time that you have these creatures. It's hard to know, but the dog himself is looking off elsewhere. I'll show you as I say, I'm no Alex Colville. I think you probably already knew that when you came here. But this is the famous dog with bone. And as you see, it's looking right at you. But it's a contorted dog. It's a dog, you see his bum, but he's turned his head. He's got his bone. His eyes are very frontal, very much like human eyes, and they're very large in his face. And there's a fence. He's up against the corner of a fence in the complete serograph. But the look on his face, he's either been discovered by somebody he thinks might take his bone. He's either prepared to fight for the bone, or he's wondering if the bone will be taken away. His expression is challenging, but it's not a portrait in the sense that he's been come upon, he's been discovered. And Colville, as you probably know, a lot of his work, human or animal or both, there's a quality of unease, there's a quality of off-balancedness often. The way characters relate to each other is odd. Faces are often obscured. And in Colville's work, it's often the animal face you see and the human face that is somehow behind it. So the whole question is, what is the dog thinking? It's like the famous Montaigne question, how do I know when I'm playing with the cat that the cat is not playing with me? Anybody who's ever had a cat knows the cat is playing with you, Montaigne. I mean, of course it is. We are merely there, to tweak that string. But the whole question of what are they thinking, I think, is what's addressed certainly in Colville's work, and the elusiveness of what they think. The piece beside it is from 1501. It's Albrecht Durer, who is, a famous painter and master engraver. This is called St. Eustace, and what it depicts is, it's a legendary story of he depicts him as if it was the Middle Ages, but actually it was sort of an ancient early Christian Roman story. St. Eustace was out hunting. He wasn't saint then, he was just whoever he was, and was confronted by an image of a stag with a cross, with a Christian cross sticking up between its antlers. And he fell back amazed and had this kind of St. Paul to Damascus moment of conversion. In this work, there are 5 dogs. It's an extinct breed called the Hirschhunden, the deer hound. And other artists, earlier artists, have also depicted St. Eustace. I was reading an interesting book about animals in art and animal rights, it's a really fascinating book. He was very critical, the author, his name is Stephen Eisenman, was very critical of this work. He said that even in the depiction by Pisanello, which was 100 years before this, at least the horse is looking at St. Eustace in his moment of transcendent glory. Whereas in this work, the 5 dogs are not looking at St. Eustace. Neither is the horse. The horse is facing back this way, and St. Eustace and the stag are kind of alone in their moment. And however, the dogs themselves, I think Stephen Eisenman is underselling Durer's commitment. He says, by the time we get to Durer, animals have no soul. But in fact, I think these dogs I've drawn these dogs numerously, and so have many other people. The 5 of them are each individual. They're all pointed in a different direction. None of them is looking at St. Eustace, but they're not really looking at each other either. There's a kind of interior contemplative quality in all of these dogs. They're beautifully drawn. He depicted dogs beautifully. Another Durer engraving is Melancholia 1, which has a melancholy, thoughtful, scholarly woman angel. And beside her is what looks like a greyhound, very old, very bony, sitting in the same kind of melancholic way. And there's another example where the dog is a hunting dog by profession, and yet is not being depicted in the act of hunting. Neither are these guys. They're out on the hunt, but they are all having a moment over, whatever is going on. And I think that question of where they're looking and what they might be thinking is one of the preoccupations of artists at various periods. I will move along simply in the interest of time here, because I do want to say something about all of these things. The next piece is, to me, in the same vein. It's the question of where is it looking. It's called Woman with Dog. It was done by the Cologne Dadaist Heinrich Höhle, probably around 1920. He was one of the Dadaist group of the kind of post-World War I era, but he and his wife, Angelika Höhle, and a bunch of others split off from the Cologne Dadaists to become the Stupid Group, as they called themselves. And they were dedicated more to proletarian art. They thought Dadaism was getting too ethereal, not really about issues, and they were interested in politics. He was, by 1933, when the Nazis rose to power, designated, as were so many, a degenerate artist. And he died in 1936, so at least he didn't have to go through, whatever might have happened to him after that. But what's interesting to me about this work, there's many things that are interesting about it. First of all, I know very little about Heinrich Höhle apart from what I just told you, and it seems to me possible that this work, even though it seems to depict a kind of upper-class relationship, might be a kind of political work. The dog might be the underdog. He's the one who's looking at us in that kind of commentator way, like Alfie in the movie Alfie, who talks from the screen, yet the kind of, you know, look who I'm with sort of quality. She's lost, the human is lost in rapture. Her long, bony fingers are clutching the little skinny arm of this sort of Chihuahua-type dog. And her eyes are closed. His ear becomes her eyelashes. It's all almost one continuous line. It's a pleasure to draw this because you see how interconnected all of these lines are. But the expression on the dog's face, I think, can only be described as sort of wry. You know, there's a quality of I'm not responsible for this. I'm not, you know, I'm an object of adoration, but, you know, this is not, you know, the life I necessarily would have picked for myself. So, yeah, well, it's hard to know whether even he would even choose to escape. As this gentleman said, you know, the dog may be saying, soon I will escape, but in fact, maybe not. I mean, maybe he's kind of, you know, happy with the status quo. The idea of the dog as commentator, I think, is something that becomes more and more of interest as we get into the, you know, this is from the 20th century, but going backward to 1810 here, this work is an anonymous work of 1810 called Les Effets Merveilleux des Bretelles, the miraculous effects of braces or suspenders. And it seems to show a rather corpulent guy being dragged into suspenders to kind of get him into these tight pants, which around the time of the French Revolution was when suspenders were invented, because pants had become these high-waisted pants, narrow little waistcoats, big thick belts were no longer in. But this work essentially is a critique. It's a fashion critique, not only of this fellow who's being kind of derricked into his pants, or the obsequious tailor who's beside him, or the man with the monocle or magnifying glass who's kind of looking on. But these two people, these slaves to fashion, these fashion victims as we would now call them, the man in the huge hat, the woman in the ridiculous hat, they're kind of making mock of this guy, but they're as ridiculous as he is. Meanwhile, the real story, I think, of course I would think this because I'm interested in the dogs, is over here. There's one dog who's a poodle with a lion cut, and he's in a wheel. He is like a turnspit dog. He is turning the pulley that derricks this guy up out into the pants, or the pants hauled onto him. He looks sort of like the British lion. I don't know if that's conscious or not, but there's a kind of, that posture is like a rampant lion on a crest. And beside him is his companion. Now this dog, the dog in the wheel, I would call a slave of a different kind, not a slave to fashion, but a slave to their fashion forwardness. And this little dog has his hind leg cocked, and he's peeing into this guy's hat. And, you know, for dogs, it's kind of, in a lot of ways, we'll see another example of this, it's often the only comment they're able to offer. You know, however, it's effective. And there's another wonderful, I almost chose another print called The Dance of the Disorderly Dogs, which is from about the same period. And it's after a work by Vernet, at least this person was anonymous, but Vernet did this one of this circus act of dogs. And they're all in these stupid outfits, kind of French Revolutionary outfits, and they're escaping because there's a bitch running along, and all these dogs have left the circus to chase her. There's an old man trying to hit them with an umbrella. There's the circus people trying to collect the dogs. But the dogs are triumphant. They don't care. They're in these dumb outfits. They don't care. They're going to chase after this dog until somebody catches them. And there is this quality, a kind of subversive quality. And I think dogs embody that as well. We tend to think of dogs as, you know, as I say, the Landseer version of the dog, the devoted dog. But in fact, dogs are resourceful and subversive, and they've always been viewed from classical times through the Renaissance as very ambivalent. They can be either animals that we trust, animals we don't, animals who are rapacious and sexual, or animals who are, will give up all their instincts for us. Inventor of the graphic novel. There are film writers who say he invented the storyboard. And in a way, things like The Rate's Progress, which this is plate number 5 from, would suggest that, or the graphic novel, where the story is told primarily in pictures, but it's a narrative, a progressive narrative. This is Tom Rakewell, who starts out at the beginning in plate number 1, discarding his common law pregnant wife in order to go off with prostitutes, and things go downhill from there. And by the time we reach him in plate 5, he is marrying an ugly old maid, a kind of a skewy-eyed old maid, but he's already kind of eyeing her serving maid, as his next conquest. And out in the back, the poor common law wife is still trying to get back together with him. She's way in the back somewhere. But there's 2 dogs in the foreground who are sort of mirroring the action. One of them has a kind of walleye, much like the old maid. And they're in this kind of matrimonial pose together. They're as if they're getting married. It's sort of like in comics, remember Dagwood, remember Daisy and Elmo and the other puppies in Dagwood, sometimes would be mirroring the action of what humans were doing. Hogarth was very fond of animals. He did another series, much sadder even than this, called The 4 Stages of Cruelty. And he loved animals, hated the way they were treated in London and elsewhere, and did these moralizing stories, which were made into prints for the purpose of spreading them to the lower classes. Print was a cheap and easy form for people who didn't have access to galleries and actual paintings. And even this work, you can see that the dogs, he sees dogs as having a kind of life of their own, a kind of an opinion of their own. Never more so than in this 1763, this is later, about 30 years later, he had done an engraving, first a painting and then an engraving. The painting is called Portrait of His Pug, and it's him and his, it's in this book here, it's him and his dog, Trump, who is a pug. And Trump was integral to his work and art. And then years later, Trump had been dead by this time, Hogarth actually destroyed this engraving, the plate of this engraving, so that he could do this satirical comment on this guy who's depicted as a bear. It was Charles Churchill, who was a clergyman who went after Hogarth because Hogarth had done a damn caricature of another guy named John Wilkes. And so, in retaliation for Churchill's screed against him, Hogarth tore his own face out of his engraving plate, inserted Churchill with his clerical bib, but as a bear with a big tumbler of beer and a Herculean club, and kept Trump the dog in, but Trump is peeing on the screed that Churchill wrote attacking Hogarth. And the dog, it has this kind of fixed, he has the same fixed expression, but he's making his statement. The dog looked a lot like Hogarth, and Hogarth plays that up. I mean, the dog is a kind of familiar spirit to Hogarth. He was, I mean, there's so many interesting things about Hogarth. He was born poor, sort of like Dickens. His father, I love this story, his father taught Latin, and then his father opened what he thought was going to be this great hit, which was a Latin-speaking only coffee house in 18th century London. He thought that was going to go. It failed, and he wound up spending 5 years in Fleet Street debtor's prison. Hogarth never spoke about it. I mean, unlike Dickens, obviously. But it stayed in his mind. And Hogarth's sense of equality, his sense of morality, and his love of his animals, not just Trump, who he depicts, but he had grave markers at his house in Chichester for all of his pets who had died. And just an amazing person. And You have to just love his fighting spirit in almost every way. Now, I better, God, all right, I'm going to zip right on here. Okay, these two works are from, this is from 1653 and this from 1660. It's this little one on the left here, which is called The Man with the Dog. And this one, they're both by Carol, I'm calling him Durer, but he is Dutch, so I don't know how I should be pronouncing it. If somebody knows better, you can tell me. Carol Durer? Okay. We'll start with the shepherd and speaking to her dog, because that's what it's called. And if you sitting on, a stone or something, and she and the dog are in conversation. And the dog is not a classic sheep-herding dog. He's in the middle of this kind of luminous world. There are all kinds of sheep and cows and things, but he doesn't. He doesn't. I feel like I should do an encore. He doesn't. Go about his herding business. Nor does she. And the question, if you look at it closely, the question is who is speaking to whom. There's a sense where she's wrapped by what the dog has to say, or by the unspoken communion that's sort of passing between them. And it's kind of like a water cooler moment or something. They're taking time away from the busy work of shepherding to have a little sit-down time together. I was so surprised by this, and also by the other one, Man with the Dog, which was done at about 1660, a few years after this one. Dujardin was, like poor Tom Rakewell in The Rake's Progress, he wound up having to marry an older woman. He married his landlady for her money because he was desperately in debt, and then spent the rest of his artistic life trying to get away from her. He did most of his painting in Italy, probably these pieces as well. And The Man with the Dog, it was one of the first works I drew here. And at first, I was so disappointed when it came out of the vault. You read the title, Man with the Dog, oh boy, I can't wait. Comes up, and the dog and the man are this big. And it's this big landscape. But then I realized that, in fact, that is what's so wonderful about it. They're two little figures of equivalent value to each other, lost in this bigger world. They're both looking off at something, a sound, a sight, something over there. The man has a stick, but it doesn't look to me like a shepherd's crook or a rifle or a club or anything, useful. The dog is not fulfilling a hunting or herding role. It's 1660, and the dog and the man appear to be just out for a companionable walk. And they're both appreciating it. They're not looking at each other, but they're both looking at the same thing. So I think it's a very interesting, suggestion of the kinds of attributes that dogs had in a period where we tend to think of all the paintings as portraits of nobles and their hunting dogs, or women and their lap dogs. These are relationships, the kind of relationships, nowadays. Something like 80% of people in the 20th and 21st centuries will identify their dogs as members of the family or companions. And this was already going on, perhaps in a more limited way, but going on especially among these artists. He did many dogs. I've found a lot of examples online, and often the people are playing with the dogs. The dogs aren't doing meaningful work. The dogs are entertaining them. The last two I chose because each in its own way is what I would call a true portrait. This is an engraving that was done by Frederick Stackpole, I believe. Or no, this one was done by, what's his name? Oh, yeah, James John Chant. But it's after the work of Breton Riviere, who, along with Landseer, was the most successful dog artist, animal artist in London of the Victorian period. He lasted a little longer than Landseer, was never quite as famous. But I have a quote here from him that I would like to read. I blew it up good and large so I could read it, It's getting to that point now, Where is it, though? Have to find the right page. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yes, he did other animals too, and he says Breton Riviere, who he wanted to be accepted like the Pre-Raphaelites. Chant was somebody who did a lot of engravings of Pre-Raphaelite paintings, but Riviere was pegged very much, as was Landseer, as an animal artist. And he says, I've always been a great lover of dogs, but I've worked at them so much I've grown tired of having them about me. However, you can never paint a dog unless you are fond of it. I never work from a dog without the assistance of a man who is well acquainted with animals. Collies, I think, are the most restless dogs. Greyhounds are also very restless, and so are fox terriers. So obviously, here he was, a guy, had them in the studio and kind of ground out the work. But this little guy, and there is one in the kids' gallery, by the way. There's another engraving by Stackpole called Sympathy, which is a very sweet-looking dog, kind of a bully-looking dog like this one, soft and heavy-muzzled, with his head on this sad little girl's shoulder. It's soppy and sentimental, but the dog is so beautifully captured. And so is this. This one's called Cave Canem, Beware of the Dog. And he's sorry, he's just a little puppy, as you can see, maybe a little Mastiff puppy or something like that. And he's caught in a moment, I think, where there's no humans in the picture. There's no big dog giving him cues about how to behave. But he seems to have some nascent notion of himself as a guard dog. He's, kind of on that very high step that he would probably fall right on his face if he tried to get down from. And he's both vulnerable and also kind of comically challenging. And the title kind of gives that away. Now, it's a very sentimental depiction, but I feel that Riviere has got something about the interior life of a dog, that this is the dog's conception of himself. This, what we call theory of mind, the ability to have a sense of your own thought processes and to attribute those to others. And that we now think that higher animals may have theory of mind. And if anybody does in the 19th century, it's this little dog. He has a sense of himself, of what I'm going to grow up to be. The way you see a little kid in a Norman Rockwell thing with his firefighter dad's big helmet on and the big boots. Or, there's a quality of trying to step into the role. But he's by himself and he's doing it himself. Now, the ultimate is the last one, and I will just kind of speed through this because I must stop, and I would like if people had an opportunity to ask any questions or make comments. But this is from 1984. This is a pencil drawing by Greg Curnoe, who was a very wonderful and interesting Canadian artist from London, Ontario, who died, as many of you probably know. He was a lover of bicycles, he was an artist of bicycles and a rider of bicycles, and he was killed in a group of cyclists on, I don't know which highway, I can't remember, but I do remember when he died, which was not too long, or 1992, I think it was when he died. So this was from 1984, and this is Rufus. And Rufus was the family dog. There were many beloved animals in the Curnoe household, but Rufus was, I think, of particular interest. And here's another dog where, even in the sketch, before we get to, very kindly, I've Magdalene and Edith and others managed to find the painting that this became, at least a reproduction of it, because it's quite germane to the question. But just looking at the sketch, there's a dog who is looking out. Unlike Colville's dog with a bone, he's not looking at us necessarily. He may not even be looking at the man who's drawing him. He's got one ear up, sort of like the water dog, but less, perhaps, calculating. And he's thinking about something. He's thinking about his role. He winds up being in a painting where you can see it if you come up. There's Rufus in color with the word squirrel written across it, very, very large. Now, I found a catalog online that had this picture in it, and the conjecture of the person who wrote the commentary was that this was the artist's representation of squirrel. This was an artist's kind of on-artist joke. This was how he chose to represent squirrel. I don't think so. I think Anybody who has a dog will know. What's on Rufus's mind? What could be bigger than squirrel? Always squirrel, constantly squirrel, thinking of squirrel, dreaming of squirrel. And it's a very 20th or 21st century. The dog is not, he doesn't get his board and room by hunting the way dogs in many of the previous eras did. He's a companion animal. He's not required to hunt. But we all know, those of us who have dogs who've chased squirrels, they're not in it to prove themselves as hunting dogs. They're in it because squirrels are there and they are there, and so they go after them. There's a nice little anecdote I found online. After Curnoe died, many of his artist and writer friends wrote tributes. One was from George Bowering, who's a West Coast writer, and he recalls going to visit the Curnoes. And he recollects Curnoe and Rufus, and he says, I drove our rented Chrysler down to London with Thea, which was Bowering's wife at the time, and we had an overnight visit. We took Rufus down to the river to chase squirrels. But Rufus had been chasing squirrels for 8 years and had never caught one. Sheila, Curnoe's wife, found the back half of a rabbit behind the couch. Their old semi-Siamese cat, Emma, had brought it in, an obvious insult to Rufus. And I think it's in that spirit that Curnoe has created this depiction of Rufus, which is, I think, both wonderfully wrought and also, as I say, it's Rufus's conception of who he is that matters in this picture. Not what he can do for us, not what we might do to him. It's who he is in the world. And I think that's why it's, for me, a great place to finish. And thank you very much. And question, is there time for any questions? Sorry, I didn't time this out very well. I wanted more time.
No, we have a bit of time. We have time.
Okay.
I would like to thank you for an absolutely fascinating and very entertaining and very educational, and allowing us to bring these works out. We've never had some of these works have probably never been on view here before. So,
well, and thank you for bringing. Truly,
it's lovely to see what's in the vault.
I appreciate what both on a weekly basis and especially tonight. This is a whole lot of work bringing all these out. And,
it's definitely worth it, though.
Anyway,
thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it's great to see all these works of art and what we can learn about dogs' perspectives in the works, and how much we are kind of projecting on the dogs, and how much we can see it from their perspective, or that kind of conflict.
Artists go through the same kinds of decision making. I think that's why I like to write about dogs, or from their point of view. Yes, we're making it all up. We have to, because they're a non-linguistic species. They communicate brilliantly, but they don't speak in a structured language that we can understand, or they presumably don't understand us the same way, but they probably understand us a whole lot better than we understand them.
We do have some time for questions. We've got a few more minutes. Do we have any questions? Jane?
It's a great shame we had photographers in here this afternoon seeing what we do. Wouldn't have been fabulous if we all brought our dogs.
Okay.
Yeah, but
so just for the... Yes.
A place where you have to wear white gloves, Jane, just to get the works out. You
Just-
want to bring some dogs? Do you
It's
not
so-
see what two of these dogs are doing? Do you not see that?
So for the people that are watching and don't know what Jane just said, she suggested that we should all have our dogs here tonight and have a photographer here to take pictures of them.
We have a lovely story about Karen Kane's Andy Warhol, Karen Kane, what the cat thought of it.
Oh,
Okay,
I think
that's another story.
I think that came out in,
Any other questions? Any other comments, or yes?
You have an obvious passion for dogs and an obvious passion for these paintings. I'm wondering why. What attracts you, what draws you here every Wednesday afternoon to these paintings, and what brings forth this passion? Why do you care so much about it?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I certainly get asked this. It's a question that, nobody would ask a writer. They wouldn't say, why are you so interested in people that you want to write stories about them? You know, what a weird choice. I mean, that's not how you're saying this. I appreciate that. But I find all animals interesting and subjects of empathy, and I feel the way Hogarth does. I just feel, you know, upset about them on a general level. But in a particular way, I think I find dogs equally as complex in our society as humans are. They're the most integrated of all animals into our society, even more than cats. Because cats, you know, cats don't have a whole series of jobs. They're not divided into breeds along the lines of what work they might be able to do for us or not. Cats are, you know, as we know who they are. But dogs have, you know, they have given up a lot. Like the wolf back there, it's either been taken from them or they voluntarily, you know, sold it for a chunk of brisket. You know, who knows what. One story is that cooked food is what got dogs, you know, 15,000 years ago to become companions of man. But they for whatever reason, in whatever way, they have made themselves as much a part of our existences, even those of us who don't have dogs or want dogs, the political issues around dogs, the breed ban legislation in Ontario against pit bulls that came into effect 10 years ago, and debates about dogs on any number of levels, certainly issues of cruelty as well as issues of ain't it a shame that dogs have daycare and doggy spas and children go shoeless, as if these were two mutually exclusive things, and if you had the one you wouldn't have the other. But that fascinates me. Their regard of us fascinates me because, as I say, you have to make such a leap of invention to imagine what it must be, but you conjecture on the basis of what's in front of you. I mean, dogs do provide evidence. In the case of the poor dog who was wrongly slain by his master for attacking the snake, the evidence can be misjudged, but dogs provide us with so much evidence on which to know them. Horses, I think, have a very symbiotic relationship with humans as well. But again, it's more circumscribed. Dogs are quite ubiquitous. And there are, you know, both stray dogs, sadly, and wild dogs, and owned dogs, and badly owned dogs, and dogs who are breeding machines, and all kinds of horrible things. But there also is this completeness of their integration. I find them charming to look at. I find that I get pleasure from their appearance. I mean, not just the huge variety of their appearance, and that's part of what makes dogs interesting, but also just the quality of their faces. And I think that is so well captured in so many of these works. I think that's why I love the water dog. His whole bodily attitude, even if he's faking it, is so complete and, you know, so well portrayed by the artist. It's, to me, no different from portraying a human and doing a portrait of a human. I mean, that's the best I can say. I find them as fascinating as people, and the emotional depth that one is able to have with them, as the Colville with the woman and terrier shows, you know, that's a scene of embrace at an airport runway. And who they are to each other, what is going on, you know, you can't know, but the depth of emotion just in the line of her shoulder is clear.
I was very struck with what you said about the thought that dogs may have theory of mind, because in the mental health world, theory of mind is really considered a very pivotal thing in the development of a human being. Not that easy to understand or describe. They're working really hard on pinning it down when it develops, how to use
Yeah,
therapy.
same with animals.
So I was just wondering, how do they know this about dogs? It's hard enough for us to
I think it's conjectural. It's the way they do with other higher, you know, like primates and other. It's by the way they relate to others. It's by, you know, experiments where you change something and see whether they can recognize the reflection in a mirror by putting, you know, with apes, you know, you put a marking on their head and then see if they can locate it in the mirror, you know, which indicates they know that that's them in there and that this is some alien thing on them. And with dogs, it's it's empirical. I mean, people like Mark Beckhoff, who's an ethologist in Colorado, specializes in dogs. What dogs' play behavior tells you about their communication. Altruism in dogs. Altruism in dogs and rats is an important determinant of, I mean, the reasons for altruism probably are no different from ours. It's good for the herd, you know. I mean, let's face it, even our altruism isn't all that altruistic. But the fact that they strategize in those ways, I mean, those are all the things I know of. But I know, you know, it's one of those kind of moving targets. Even animal consciousness, up until the last, you know, 60 or 100 years, has been very much in question. I mean, behaviorists still question it, whether they vocalize or actually express feelings. I guess that's it.
Well, take the opportunity to come up and look. We still have a few more minutes. There will be an announcement when it's time to go and get your coats down at the front, but we've got 20 minutes until the doors close, as far as I know. And I'd like to thank you again.
Oh,
it was
thank
just
you.
Great.
And thank you. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thanks, Ben.
If you would like to be on our email list, we just send out an announcement once a month, and we tell you what's happening in prints and drawings that month. We tell you about the talks that are coming up, like Erika's, and when our open door is, you can come in and look at things and all that. We'll put a piece of paper and a pen on the desk up there if you want to give us your email address. Just once a month, I promise. Thank you for coming.